Now, from CBS News Miami, this is Facing South Florida with Jim DeFede.
Welcome to Facing South Florida. I'm Lauren Pastrana, in this week for Jim DeFede. All week long, students and other demonstrators at universities across the country have been clashing with police, many setting up encampments and even taking over school buildings. More than 2,000 people have been arrested. They're calling for an end to the war in Gaza and also making demands of their universities to divest from any Israeli interests. But President Biden says the pro-Palestinian campus protests have not prompted him to rethink his Middle East policies. For a deeper perspective, I turn to Jacob Solomon, the president and CEO of the Greater Miami Jewish Federation, as well as Samir Kakli, the president of the South Florida Muslim Federation. I spoke to them individually, but asked them the same questions. Here's what they had to say. The world has really been watching these last few weeks and really these last few days as students at universities all over the country first started demonstrating, demanding an end to the war in Gaza, and then they started making demands of their universities themselves, these institutions now turning into full-blown encampments on some campuses. What's been your feeling watching these demonstrations grow and even get tense at some times?
Yeah, it's alarming to say the least. I want to share two different perspectives, if you will. One is as a Jew, and I certainly have to admit that I feel extraordinarily threatened by this. It feels unfair. It feels confusing to see Israel unjustly criminalized, demonized, held to a double standard is outrageous and frankly terrifying because we know where those kinds of feelings can lead, and we're seeing evidence that violence and anti-Semitic behavior is emanating from these protests. I also have to share that as an American, I'm equally concerned. I love America. I respect, cherish, and honor its democratic traditions, including that of free speech. But there is a clear demarcation, in my opinion, between peaceful exercise of free speech and the ability to share points of view with violence, intimidation, harassment, occupation, and certainly we've seen evidence of that throughout these student protest movements. I should qualify that. I say student protest movement, but I think it's very clear that among the people who are protesting and occupying and harassing are people who are outside agitators, who are people coming from all kinds of places with all kinds of agendas.
It's been mixed. It's a roller coaster. I am so happy and thankful to God that in America we have so much concern about the genocide, about children being slaughtered on a scale of thousands, about children being starved out, and our country is coming out against it. So that gives me like a lot of hope, and I'm so pleased with that. And at the same, unfortunately, at the same time, I'm so disappointed and shocked at the response in some cases, in many cases, unfortunately, from the establishment, from the law enforcement. Just a day ago, and right here in Florida, in USF, students were assembling in a peaceful protest, and they were met with violence from the police in riot gear, and they were met with tear gas. They were terrorized by the people who were supposed to be protecting them, and that was so sad to see.
What's your message to people who see these protests and deem them anti-Semitic? What do you tell them if they say that to you?
I think that demanding an end to a war, demanding an end to financial support of a genocide is not anti-Semitic. Protesting, demanding an end to this is and demanding, people saying that no business as usual because there's 30,000 people dead. This has to stop. That's what any person of conscience should be doing right now, and that's what those protesters are doing. Falsely claiming anti-Semitism, it's a coping mechanism for some pro-Israel supporters who feel that they see these images coming out of Gaza and they feel probably tremendous shame. How can you not, as a human? Anybody would feel that shame. But then, instead of coming on the right side and asking for an end to this war, some unfortunately seek to avoid the guilt they feel by claiming to be victims themselves and just making this false charge of anti-Semitism. They're not anti-Semitic.
Well, it's hard to generalize, and I think to some extent each campus situation has its own complexion. You see some where it borders on a mob mentality, and you see others where it's kind of a bunch of young people kind of singing "Kumbaya" and "Why can't we all get along?" I think the reality, though, is that whether by intent or by effect, Jewish students are feeling threatened. When you have people saying things like "all Zionists should die," or "Israel will fail," or "Hamas is right," there's a lack of clarity on some of these people's part as to what Hamas stands for. I think there's a painful and kind of bitter irony. There was a ceasefire on October 6th. Hamas broke that ceasefire. Israel and Hamas were kind of getting along. I'm not saying they were best of friends, but there was a status quo which was broken by Hamas's brutal, sadistic, almost animalistic murder, and the violence that ensued on October 7th is beyond words. So for people now to kind of naively say, "Oh, we want a ceasefire," when Hamas is publicly and repeatedly saying our goal is to continue to do this as often and as painfully as possible. Hamas wants more Palestinians to die. It's Hamas's playbook to have Israel respond in a way they have to protect their citizenry. Hamas uses human shields. Hamas surrounds themselves with hostages. If Hamas wanted a ceasefire, if these people wanted to put an end to the war in Gaza, call on Hamas to release the hostages, call on Hamas to lay down their arms, call on Hamas to accept Israel's right to exist. There would be a ceasefire overnight.
Instead, what we're hearing are calls for their universities to divest from their Israeli interests. What does that look like for people who are saying, what interest do these universities have in the Israeli government, and what would it look like to actually divest? What would that mean for the future of the universities and for Israel?
Well, number one, maybe these individuals calling for the boycott should look at their iPhones and their Android phones and delete all the apps that were developed in Israel. Maybe the doctors among them should stop using medical procedures and surgical techniques that were developed in Israel. Maybe we should stop using Waze in our morning commutes. I mean, it's almost a willful ignorance on a lack of clarity, at the very least, between good and evil, between civilization and barbarism. And the fact that our young people are so willing to embrace a narrative about Israel, there is the narrative that's being used and abused, I would say, on campus is that if you are the victim, you're automatically right. If you are less powerful, you're automatically in the right. The fact that these individuals have said, well, Jews are part of the oppressor class and Israel is a settler colonial enterprise, is just nonsense. My father-in-law spent time in Auschwitz. Both of my in-laws were survivors. For them to talk about Israel as a genocidal nation, believe me, if Israel wanted to commit genocide, they could do it in about 10 minutes. And the very fact that they're calling Israel genocidal is just a perverse, cynical inversion of morality.
And I think that's completely legitimate to divest from financial interests that are participating in illegal occupation of Palestinian lands is a very reasonable thing, and it's something that's what the protesters are asking for. One example of that is I believe in Brown University. So they actually that's a model that I wish other universities would follow. Instead of sending the police on the protesters, they actually negotiated with the leads of the protesters, and they came up with an agreement that they will have the student body come up with a vote to decide whether or not to divest from companies, that the university divest from companies that are involved with the occupation, Israeli occupation of Palestinian lands. And they came up with that agreement, and that ended the protests.
We cannot be cowed. We can't be intimidated by the hostility that we're seeing. We have to remember that Americans are good people, regardless of their politics, regardless of their of religious persuasion, of their race, their creed, their sexual orientation. Americans, by and large, are good people, and they know the difference between right and wrong. And Jews need to continue to live proudly, openly, in a celebratory way, and to come together as community.
I thank God that, you know, we have so many young people. They're coming out and saying, no, this is not all right, and we're not going to stand for this as Americans. This is not what America stands for. America stands for freedom for all people, whether you're Jewish, whether you're Muslim, whether you're Christian. That's exactly what the protesters are asking for, that everyone should be free in that region. Jews, the Muslims, whether you're Palestinian, whether you're Israeli, you should be free. You should be able to live with dignity and hope. That's what they're asking for, and that's an American value.
Thank you to both Jacob Solomon and Samir Kakli for their candid insights. From college campuses across the nation to public school classrooms right here in South Florida, the fate of under-enrolled Broward schools hangs in the balance. We'll talk to a school board member about the possible solutions next.